Hi again, welcome back. So we're on like lesson two of the beginning of Act Two, actually most of Act Two, we're covering. In fact, so last time we had a look at Sheila and thinking about how much Sheila had changed and how we're starting to see that already. Today we're going to focus more on the character of Gerald. And if you have a look at today's learning question, it is, can I start to appreciate the importance of Gerald in the play and begin to analyse what J.B. Priestley teaches us about Edwardian hypocrisy and double standards? Because I would argue that's one of Gerald's main purposes in the play. It's to reveal the double standards evident in Edwardian life when it comes to gender and class differences. So if it has been a few days since you last read or watched this section of the play, what I'd like you to do to start off with, please, is to remind yourself of the section where Gerald tells Sheila and the inspector all about his relationship with Daisy Renton. So in the script, you're going from where he says, I met her at the Stalls bar at the Palace. And in the video, that is on 30 minutes and 30 seconds. You can see the web addresses just below that, but as usual, I'll put details of the video I want you to watch in the description below, but also in the info tab above. So if you need to watch that again, and as always, make sure you're following along in the play at the same time. I'll see you back here in 5 to 15 minutes, depending how much you're rewatching. Okay, just when we finished at the bottom of the script last time, I'd put now for a bit of context, and that's what we are going to look at now. So Gerald met Daisy Renton at the Stalls bar of the Palace Variety Theatre, and I just want to try and give you an idea of what that bar would be like, and what kind of people would be in there, what kind of atmosphere would be going on in there. I've got two fantastic images which come from Victoria and Albert Museum, and again we've got this link here where you can learn loads if you're interested in drama or the history of entertainment, anything like that. You can learn much more about what's known as music hall and variety theatre, which is what it developed into. So this poster here shows some different variety theatres and one of the acts just here, and on the next page, also from the V&A, is this fabulous poster here, which we'll have a closer look at in a second. So variety theatre was something which was very popular before the advent of movies and TV. So in 1912, cinema was in its very early days, and you probably only go to see a silent movie where you'd have to read the subtitles, the little comments off the screen, very over dramatic. So people didn't, that it was very new, so people didn't tend to go there too much. So here you can see a poster of this variety theatre. It's got two entrances, one on Charing Cross Road in London, one in Leicester Square. I don't think that the Palace Theatre in Bromley would have been quite as fancy as this, but it would have been really rather gorgeous. Music hall had started mainly in pubs, but in Edwardian era, there was one particular man who ran music halls, and he was quite religious, and he really wanted to open up the idea of variety to a family audience. So he started commissioning lots of theatres to be built. And if you go into the West End in London, into Theatreland in London, you will still see many of the theatres which were originally built during the Edwardian era to house variety shows. Okay, but what is a variety show? Well, up above you will see some photos from a variety show that still goes on in a theatre in London's Coliseum nowadays. Oh no, the London Palladium, I believe it is, not the Coliseum, the London Palladium, where the Royal Variety performance happens around Christmas time every year. And you see Simon Cowell there, and I think that's one of One Direction. And on Britain's Got Talent, which is also a TV variety show, and also a talent show. I think the winner of that gets to do a little bit of entertainment at the Royal Variety show. And actually, it hasn't changed that much, but back in the day in Edwardian times, it was way, way, way more popular. It wasn't just a once a year kind of thing. So you can see here, this one is from the London Coliseum, which isn't where the Royal Variety is, that's the Palladium. But you can see the kind of acts that you might go and see there. And this is from February 1910. So it talks about little Elise Craven, the Queen of the Fairies. So that would probably be some dance, maybe kind of ballet style, some kind of children dressed up and dancing around in a big performance, or dressed up as fairies and looking lovely. Then you've got someone here called Miss Evie Green, the famous musical comedy star. So she would probably sing some songs and tell some jokes in between. Here down here it says Madia Surith, the Star of the Orient, in her dances. And something a little bit different for the audience there. Someone who's doing a snake dance with a python on stage, it says. And then something else, Russian folk songs there. So a Russian choir singing at this variety performance. Now, bear in mind, this is in the West End of London. So this is going to be quite a cut above the kind of entertainment you might see at Bromley. So a lady ventriloquist, it talks about here, a comedian, someone who's going to come on and play the violin. So my goodness, how many have you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think that's a magician there, possibly. So 11 different acts, all on the same bill. This show, you can see, it says twice daily at 2:30 and 8, but sometimes at these variety theatres there will be 4 performances a day. Now here's your interesting bit though, of context for an inspector course, and that's the ticket prices down here that you can see. So the orchestral stalls are 2 shillings and 6pence. So those are the most expensive tickets, and those are the ones which are nearest to the orchestra, which is just below the stage. So those are the most expensive ones. And it's this area of the stalls where Gerald went, because he was bored with the show, to this bar to get a drink and to mix with men of the town and women of the town, or the prostitutes, we should say. Okay, so those are the most expensive tickets. There's also the Royal Circle. So that, again, is the closest to the stage, but upper level. So I'll have a look at a map in a second. And those are the second most expensive tickets. And then slightly cheaper tickets towards the back of the stalls where the view wouldn't have been good. Right at the top, you've got the grand tier, and those tickets are cheap, and even higher than that, the balcony, where you can buy a ticket just for pence. So again, a bit like the Titanic, the variety theatre contained all the different classes of people and the entertainment on the stage. But the people kind of separated, like on the Titanic ship, into different areas depending on how much money you could afford to pay. And also you probably have more fun, arguably, sitting with your own type of people. You also had to dress up for the theatre, whether you were working class or upper class. But if you're a working class person, you might have to save up to have a night out at the variety theatre to get that 6pence together. Whereas someone like Gerald, he said, I'd had a hard day at work and I just popped in there. So that kind of really reveals that for him, he can easily have a night out at the variety theatre. He doesn't have to think about it. It's just something that he can do on his way home from work, which contrasts with working class people who would have to probably save up to go and watch the actual show. So and that's what the variety theatre is like. If you have a look here, you can see the orchestral stalls are these ones at the front here. So those are the expensive seats, and the ones in the Royal Circle just here. And then the balcony, there isn't one at this theatre. The balcony would be right up here. And these are like the cheap seats right at the back here, the cheap seats, all these ones here. Also, fancy people would sit in these boxes to watch the show as well. Now, this image comes from an old Edwardian theatre in Burnley, which sounds a bit like Brumley, actually. You can see it's got modern signs up here to say where you can be served and not. But this is very authentic with the stained glass here and the dark wood and the beams. This is exactly what the bar would have looked like in the Palace Theatre. So when you're thinking about Gerald chatting to Eva Smith, you can see a little corner of the table here, and you can imagine Eva Smith, Daisy Renton she is now, wedged into the corner somewhere over there against Joe Maggoty's fat old carcass. Hopefully you can picture that really, really clearly. And you can also see that although Eva Smith can come into the theatre and go to the bar, she would need the ticket to be able to go in to see the show. And obviously she didn't have a ticket for the show, but she can come into the bar. So there's where she's sitting, thinking about this life that she might have to lead, a life of a prostitute that she might end up having to lead. But with Alderman Joe Maggoty having her wedged in there, that's probably put her off that idea for quite some time, I would imagine. So that was a little bit of context just about the variety theatre. And you can see it is interesting that the stalls bar, the bar where the most expensive seats are, that's the one that is a favourite haunt of women of the town. Now, if the women of the town were going to the upper circle bar to pick up people of a working class background, the people who are sitting in the cheap seats, that would be one thing. But these women of the town, these prostitutes, are deliberately going into the bar of the expensive seats. They are looking for wealthy clients, and they know that there's a ripe audience for them in there. Gerald says, I wasn't enjoying the show very much. What's he say? Something up here. The show wasn't very bright, so it's probably some singers that he didn't like, or it's just not a very good show. So he has that luxury of being able to go for a drink instead. And where does he head? He heads to the bar where the prostitutes meet. He makes that choice to do that. Okay, so a favourite haunt of women of the town. Make sure you've got your script to annotate. If you don't, press pause and go and get your script and do it now. Mrs. Birling doesn't want Sheila to listen to this story, but Sheila is still acting bitter. Remember that stage direction from last time. She says, you're forgetting I'm supposed to be engaged to the hero of it. And there's lots of language in this section, kind of heroic language. So Gerald says, I didn't propose to stay down there in the bar long. And the reason why he didn't want to stay there was because he says, I hate those hard-eyed, dough-faced women. So he's saying that he didn't want to be in a bar surrounded by prostitutes. He just went down there to grab a drink. And I think it's up to the audience whether they believe him at this point or not. But I think that this language is well worth exploring and zooming in on. So when he describes the hard-eyed, dough-faced women, see if you can add some annotation to this as I'm talking. So if you're hard eyed, it suggests that there isn't any kind of soft emotion in your eyes. People often say that the eyes are the windows to your soul. So if you're hard-eyed, it shows that your soul is tough and hardened, that your soul isn't kind of soft and gentle. If you've been a prostitute, why would you become hard-eyed? Probably because you have to block off your emotions to be able to do that kind of job. You couldn't allow yourself to feel affection or love or anything like that, and your emotions would have to be hardened so that you can go through what you have to do every day, maybe several times a day, to be able to earn your living. I thought dough-faced is also really, really interesting, because when we think about dough, we think about bread making and kneading bread. And when I think of dough-faced, it kind of suggests that the women have got quite kind of puffy faces, and there might be several reasons why their faces are a bit puffy. It could be because they drink too much alcohol. That can make your face really puff out. And why would they need to drink the alcohol? Again, to be able to deaden their emotions and their feelings and be able to do what they need to do. The other reason they could be dough-faced is because when you have a dough, you're kind of manipulating it and pounding it, and it could show as part of their job that they've been hit and then they've healed, and their face is almost like dough because it's like been injured and healed so many times. And then finally, the fact that they're dough-faced could show that they have been so kind of beaten down and moulded by what society has done to them, that it's kind of made their skin look unnatural and fake and shaped into a shape that it shouldn't be. So why has this happened to them? Because these women have to service the needs of the wealthy and the upper classes, and they have to sell themselves and virtually sell their soul to fulfill these needs of these wealthy old men and young men, all sorts of men who can afford their services. So Gerald wasn't going to go there. He was going to go either home or go and watch more of the show. But he spots Daisy Renton there, who he describes as very pretty, soft brown hair, big, dark eyes. And that's a very, very similar description to the description that Sheila gave of Eva when she describes what she looked like in the shop, especially those big dark eyes we talked about. I've put down here, her looks are significant. Remember that Sheila treated her badly and had her fired because she was such an attractive girl. She stood out to Mr. Birling because she was attractive, and perhaps that's why she would have been promoted, but also that could have been her downfall because she was attractive, and one of the ringleaders were Mr. Birling. That could be another reason why she was fired. And here she is again, looking very pretty and very attractive, and that has drawn Gerald immediately to her because her good looks make her stand out from the other typical prostitutes who are in there. However, it also really, really highlights her innocence as well. And if you have a look at this list of 3 that Gerald uses down here, he describes her as young, fresh, and charming. And all of those words convey innocence. So the youth, obviously, like Sheila again, fresh. So it's kind of almost like virginal. She hasn't been touched. She hasn't been messed around with, unlike these poor old dough-faced women up here. And charming. So on top of being young and fresh, she also just looks really elegant, and she's probably really easy to get on with as well. Down here, Gerald suddenly takes in, I've just taken it in properly, that she's dead. And at the beginning, remember when Gerald said that that he agreed with Mr. Birling that she should be sacked, and he's just kind of gone along quite arrogantly with everything. He didn't seem emotionally affected by it at all, unlike Eric and Sheila. However, now that he's got a personal connection to the girl, suddenly her death means something to him, and now all of a sudden it really has affected him. And notice the inspector, I notice now she's dead. Yes, she's dead. And the inspector is echoing Gerald's words in the same way that he did with Sheila previously and Mr. Birling before that. So he's not embellishing it like with emotive language in the same way that he did when he was echoing Sheila's words. We've got down here this little anecdote about old Joe Maggoty, and this is important because in the video for some reason they don't mention his name, but old Joe Maggoty is half drunk and goggle-eyed, and he had wedged her into a corner with that obscene fat carcass of his. So Gerald is disgusted by Joe Maggoty. You can see that really clearly here. He's an old man and he's a fat man, and he's got this innocent, fresh, charming young girl wedged into the corner in the bars. And old Joe Maggoty carries a reputation with him. He's described as a notorious womanizer, and then he's described as being one of the worst sots and rogues in Brumley. And anyone who knows anything about the hashtag Me Too movement will probably have in their mind, when you're thinking of Joe Maggoty, Harvey Weinstein, who was that Hollywood producer who molested and raped so many young actresses by promising them stars or threatening to ruin their career. And I think that Alderman Joe Maggoty sounds really similar to that kind of disgusting man. However, this man, much like Harvey Weinstein, is a man in power. He's a man who wields power in the Brumley community. He's an alderman. If you remember, Mr. Birling himself was an alderman too. An alderman is only one step down from Lord Mayor. So he's like a councillor. And someone like that who has a really important position within the community, he should be actually upholding the moral standards. But this disgusting old man is a hypocrite, because whilst controlling the city and having a big say what happens in the city, he's kind of dragging down the moral code of the city with his womanizing and his sexist attitude, and clearly frequenting prostitutes as well. Now there's and just up here a real contrast as well. So on the one hand you've got the young, fresh, charming Daisy Renton, and on the other hand you've got the old, half-drunk, goggle-eyed Joe Maggoty. And he's not just half-drunk, goggle-eyed and old, he's also obscene, fat, and carcass suggests that his body looks like something which is killed, ready for meat. Mrs. Birling says, we are learning something tonight. And there's something ironic about what she says there, because what she's talking about is learning this gossip about Joe Maggoty, a respected friend of hers, an ex-colleague of Mr. Arthur Birling, someone who probably served on the council together with him when he was Lord Mayor. So she is learning some gossip. She's learning some juicy morsels about someone that she didn't know previously. But I believe that Sheila points out on the next page, of course we are. What Sheila means is we're learning about ourselves. We're learning the difference between right and wrong. We're learning how our behaviour can affect someone else. Having said that, Sheila already knew about Alderman Maggoty because he is indiscriminate. I don't know if you could say that's one good thing about him. He doesn't just single out working class girls. One of Sheila's friends has been sexually harassed by him. A girl I know had to see him at the town hall one afternoon, and she only escaped with a torn blouse. So you can see he's trying to grab and grope one of Sheila's friends. And Birling is shocked because Sheila says this, but not particularly shocked that Alderman Maggoty actually did that. Anyway, Gerald describes how he goes in and kind of rescues Daisy Renton, like I said, the saviour that he is, rescues her from Joe Maggoty by making up a story. But then what does Gerald do? Gerald doesn't just say to her, there you go, and walk away and go back to the show. Gerald takes her along to the county hotel for a drink. So that leaves me wondering, okay, just because Gerald is slim and in his 30s and not drunk and goggle-eyed, but rather charming himself, does that mean that he's any better or any worse than Alderman Maggoty just because he's not such an unattractive character? And again, perhaps Gerald is being hypocritical. So there's a lot of hypocrisy that we see going on here. There could be something for you to decide. Does Gerald genuinely just want to get her out of there, or does he always have another motive, an ulterior motive on his mind? Why does he take her to a quiet hotel? Because he doesn't want to be seen by his wealthy friends, because he knows what he's doing is wrong, or is he genuinely trying to protect Daisy Renton? The playwright doesn't give us any easy answers here. I guess a lot of it would depend on how Gerald is being played and portrayed at this point. Anyway, Gerald buys her a drink at the county hotel. She had a port and lemonade. And I've got a couple of interpretations of this. First of all, do you remember we said about this mirror with Sheila on the bright side of the mirror and Eva on the dark side of the mirror? You remember Sheila was drinking port to celebrate her engagement to Gerald. And the first drink that Gerald buys for Daisy Renton is a port and lemon. However, before I'd ever even read An Inspector Calls, my old granny, who probably would have been about 10-15 years younger all the way back than these characters all the way back in the Edwardian era, so she would have been a little girl while this play was going on, she always used to say to me that port and lemon is a tart drink. And that's what prostitutes drink. It's not a classy drink. It's something you kind of take in, something posh like a glass of port, and you're lengthening that out. So it kind of makes it almost like an Edwardian alcopop kind of thing. So that's what my granny used to say, that port and lemon was a tart drink. So so that's what Eva Smith was drinking, but you can see that parallel to Sheila there. Now, down here, just an interesting point. It's the second time it's been mentioned. Daisy Renton, she told Gerald she'd lost both parents. So again, that's kind of backing up the story that we've heard already from Mr. Birling, but also reminding the audience that that she has no parents who she can turn to for backup. Like if things go wrong to her, it's not like going back home, going back to her family is not an option for this girl. So the playwright is reminding us of that. J.B. Priestley reminds us in this repeated idea. And then this other detail, she's had a job in one of the works, had to leave after a strike. She told me something about the shop too. So all that kind of verifies and triangulates what had been told in the other stories as well. Gerald ended up having to get the county hotel, get them to make her something to eat. She was desperately hard up. Desperately hard up means she's extremely poor. So she has her lodgings, a room, and she's become so poor, it seems that she has a choice. Do I pay for my room or do I pay for food? And she would rather be starving but have somewhere to sleep than have food but be homeless. So that's the choice that she's had to make, because she is so desperately hard up. She's so poor at this point because she's been jobless for some time. And that's why probably she ended up in the palace bar with the prostitutes, because that's the life choice she's thinking that she might need to make. And the inspector asked, did you keep her as your mistress? Mrs. Birling is like, what? She's extremely naive. Although she treats Sheila like a child, actually it's Mrs. Birling who is more childish. She doesn't see what's right in front of her, does she? And Sheila's like, of course, mother, it was obvious from the start. And then actually we see, remember last time we talked about Sheila changing, this time we see Sheila changing in a more positive way towards Gerald. Go on, Gerald, she says, don't mind mother. Sheila's being kind. She's encouraging Gerald to tell his story. She's not doing it in a nasty way. She's not being sarcastic now. She knows it is time for Gerald to get the story out at this point. So Gerald tells us his story. And he tells us about a friend of mine, Charlie Brunswick, gone off to Canada for 6 months. Let me have the key of a nice little set of rooms he had. He asked me to keep an eye on them for him and use them if I wanted to. So we've got a couple of things going on here. The first is you've got someone like Eva Smith and all those hundreds and thousands of millions of working class girls like Eva Smith who are having to choose between food and accommodation. It's one or the other. You can't afford both. And the room that she's living in is a dingy, horrible room. And Gerald's wealthy upper class friend, well, we presume that he's upper class, Charlie Brunswick, he's probably got the family home. He's probably got a home in the country, and he's got somewhere to live in Canada, and he's got a nice set of rooms in Bromley Town Centre. And he's offering to lend them to Gerald. Gerald's going to go and make kind of check on them from time to time, but he said you can use them if you want to. So it's almost as if these wealthy young men are in collusion, and they understand that perhaps keeping a mistress or having a little bit of fun in this set of rooms is just something that is done. It kind of really, really normalizes that action. And again, this is revealing the hypocrisy of Edwardian times. So a young man who's already got a girlfriend, there's this expectation that he might have use for a set of rooms for whatever reason that might be. It also seems really immoral to me, as I've mentioned before, that the wealthy should be able to afford several homes, some of which probably lie empty more than they're actually being occupied, whilst other people are struggling to make ends meet and find somewhere to live. It seems incredibly unfair and unjust. Okay, so we've got these ideas here that Gerald and Daisy always knew that the affair was going to end. That wasn't a surprise to anybody. When they went into it, they knew the affair was going to end. And that's because Eva would have known that Gerald could not marry outside of his class, as we discussed in the last video. If he had tried to marry outside his class, he would have been disowned and disinherited from his family. So it was always inevitable that they were going to split up, and Daisy knew that. And off she went to some seaside place. And I think it is relevant that she went to the seaside, because that's kind of like cleansing. You go to the seaside, like to take the water. And, you know, it's probably those happy memories of childhood that took her back there. So Gerald is really upset about everything that happened. So he says, I want to go out, walk about for a while if you don't mind. But he is the only character who J.B. Priestley allows to leave the Birling house, and that does become significant in Act 3. So J.B. Priestley is somewhat using Gerald here as a dramatic device, as a plot device, because that's going to be important later on. Sheila hands him back the engagement ring, and if you were directing this play, you'd need to think about how does she give him back the ring. In the National Theatre production, she flings it at him really, really angrily, but in the production that we've been watching, she hands him the ring really nicely, and that goes with the words. Actually, she says, I'd rather respect you more than I've ever done before, and that's because Gerald is being honest. She says, at least you've been honest. I believe what you told us, how you helped her out of pity. And Sheila has grown up so much. She always suspected Gerald. She found out the truth and she got angry and she was sarcastic with him. But then when she hears the full story, she realizes that it was because of her. It was her responsibility, kind of almost throwing Daisy or Ava into Gerald's arms. So she has to suffer the consequences of that. And she's empathised with Eva so much. And in a way, she respects Gerald because Gerald was originally certainly really kind to her and helped her out. And I think Sheila can also see the inevitability that they would become involved because of the way that their relationship had got quite close when he was giving her money and probably checking in on her and so on. So Sheila says to Gerald, you and I aren't the same people who sat down to dinner here. We have to start all over again, getting to know each other. And Gerald says in the script, not in the video version actually, I know what you mean, but I'm coming back if I may. So she says we need to start over again, getting to know each other, and he says I am coming back if I may. So both of them are not burying this relationship. Clearly, like there is an attraction between them, and there was real love between them, but Sheila's saying we need to start again from scratch. And get to know each other, like for who we really are. Remember that lighting effect, the brighter, harder lighting. Now they can see each other for who they are. And actually, they still like each other, but they are different people. So they need to get to know each other again. And you could see that things could work between Gerald and Sheila, but it would be a very, very different relationship from the one that Gerald and Sheila would have had when she was still that silly, flirtatious girl, and Gerald was all kind of arrogant swagger. And you could see them being a really strong couple who have changed and grown up very much and seen the effect of their actions. But there's a lot of work for them to do on that relationship. Birling, on the other hand, says, Sheila, I'm not defending him, but you must understand that a lot of young men ... And Sheila cuts off her father. Normally it's her father who goes around cutting off everyone else in their speech. And I always find this really, really shocking. Birling, as a father, should be protecting her daughter. He should be looking to punch Gerald's lights out, quite honestly, at this point. Anyway, Sheila is being very, very gracious. But Birling is like desperate that he's going to lose his status in this kind of business alliance that he was forming. So it's quite shocking behaviour. Okay, and Sheila notices that the inspector didn't show the photo, which Gerald so desperately wanted to see, but I think that's because he wanted confirmation that it was the same girl. He had this on his mind the whole time. So that's where we're going to end our annotations for now. We're going to look to summarise some of those points and see if we have managed to meet the learning objective, if we can answer the learning questions from today. Okay, so let's do that. There we go. And let's have a look here. So there's loads of Edwardian hypocrisy in here. So what does J.B. Priestley teach us about Edwardian hypocrisy and double standards? So we can see both under here. I'll probably missed some out. So if you've spotted any that I haven't got, please add them onto your list. So men have considerable freedom, don't they? So Alderman Maggoty in the bar, Gerald popping into the theatre on his way home, Eric out drinking night after night and his mother doesn't even know. But these men with their considerable freedoms can easily abuse that freedom. It means that Gerald can carry on an affair when he's got a serious relationship with someone. Who knows if Alderman Maggoty has a wife at home and he's telling her he is working late in the office. We've got this other gender hypocrisy, haven't we? So the middle class and upper class women are expected to stay pure. So they're meant to be virgins when they marry, whereas wealthy men are expected to be experienced. So next point is, who do they get their experience from? Well, they use working class girls to get their sexual experience. So as far as they're concerned, the reputations and moral reputations of these working class girls are expendable. It doesn't matter to them, and they can use their wealth and their charm to seduce these working class girls, a little bit like Gerald did with Daisy Renton. Or if they don't want to go to that much effort, they can just pay for one of those hard-eyed, dough-faced prostitutes. We also learned that if you're a man in power, like Alderman Joe Maggoty, you can abuse that position of power by, for example, sexually harassing girls. And he's not fussy. He doesn't care whether it's a working class girl, a prostitute, or one of Sheila's friends. If he can get his fat hands on her to molest her, then he will have a go. And is anyone defending those girls? No, nobody is. I'd love to say that everything had changed in the 21st century, but it seems that things haven't when we've got someone like President Trump running the world, basically. We've got men in power, and in Edwardian times, those men in power were meant to uphold standards of morality, whereas actually they have some of the lowest moral standards of all. And then you've got this idea that some wealthy people, they own land and they own property, and perhaps they have multiple properties, whilst the poor struggle to manage to keep one lodging room, or a small flat or accommodation. And you've got someone like Daisy Renton, Eva Smith, who can't pay her rent and pay for food, so she has to choose between those two things, homelessness or starvation. We learn from Mr. Birling this horrible thing that for dads like Mr. Birling, getting your daughters married for money or for social status could be seen as more important than love and trust in a relationship. And then from Mrs. Birling, throughout this section, we learned that the moneyed upper classes, they truly, honestly believed that working class people were somehow less human, have fewer emotions, like a different species of human being. But in fact, the way that Daisy Renton is presented by Gerald in particular suggests that she has morality. She has this freshness and this innocence about her. Mr. Birling described her as a good worker, and she was laughing when she was in Millwood. So she has this kind of fresh innocence about her. But the reason why she becomes degraded and morally corrupt is because she ends up kind of servicing the needs of the wealthy and the powerful and being used by them. So I'll just read the sentence out. So the moneyed upper classes believe working class people have less humanity than them, but in fact the working classes have their humanity and morality degraded from servicing the needs of the wealthy and the powerful. So that's quite a kind of a challenge point there. So the kind of thing that you want to wrap your head around if you're aiming for those higher grades on this subject, on this English literature topic. Okay, a little task for you to have a go at. So Gerald describes Alderman Maggoty as a sot and a rogue. So a bad person, a man with an eye for the ladies, who, when he gets his lady, he doesn't treat her very nicely. Do you think that Gerald is just as bad as Alderman Maggoty? Why yes, and why no? Pause the video just for about maybe 90 seconds and see if you can come up with 3 or 4 reasons why he is a sot and a rogue, and then 3 or 4 reasons why he is not. And we can compare what you did to what I have put down. So give yourselves about 90 seconds to pause it and see if you can draw this little grid in your book and come up with 3 or 4 ideas for each. Okay, so I think definitely, as you probably gathered when I was going through the text, I think that he is a sot and a rogue. So he might have gone in with good intentions, but he ended up with Eva as his mistress in the long run, of Daisy. What was he doing in the Palace Stalls bar in the first place? He knew exactly what he was going to find there. In all of that summer, he cheated on Sheila and he lied to her. So she knew something was going on, and well, nowadays we call it gaslighting, wouldn't we? He just barefaced lied to her. I think to myself, well, if Gerald was old and fat, like Alderman Maggoty, would what he did, that is go, oh, come away, my love, I'll take you for a drink in a hotel, would that be just as nasty as what Alderman Maggoty did? It was more sly. Certainly, at least Alderman Maggoty was being quite honest in what he was doing. Gerald is very familiar with the women of the town, so it seems. He's not in his young 20s, so he is old enough to know better. He's in his 30s. And quite honestly, if Gerald wanted to help Daisy Renton, there are many different ways he could have helped her rather than installing her in his friend's flat. His dad is the boss of Crofts Limited. Eva Smith, Daisy Renton had factory experience. He certainly could have helped her secure a well-paid job working for Crofts Limited. So he didn't have to install her in these flats. There are many other ways that he could have helped her. He could have given her a reference. He could have employed her as a lady's maid or something like that. Okay, so why isn't he a sot and a rogue? Well, yeah, he does seem to rescue her when she seems to be in trouble. Would he have done if she hadn't been so pretty? Who knows? Sheila believes that he genuinely felt sorry for her. So if Sheila believes that, I think that JB Priestley wants the audience to believe that too. He didn't, although he was lying to Sheila, he didn't lie to Daisy. He didn't pretend that their relationship could be anything more. He didn't make her promises that he couldn't keep. He looked after her nicely. He gave her an allowance so that she could be comfortable and eat. And then when they separated, he gave her money so that she could cope for a couple of months afterwards, so to get her on her feet. The inspector says that she was happy when she was with Gerald. And then we could argue that Gerald is just a victim of the Edwardian hypocrisy as she is. He maybe, if he was attracted to her and if he knew that there could be anything in it, he could maybe have allowed himself to fall in love with her, but he was probably stopping himself doing that because he knew that it was going to come to nothing. And then finally, he doesn't seem to go around abusing women randomly, any old women randomly, like Joe Maggoty is. So he's certainly not that kind of a sot and a rogue anyway. So those were my ideas, and hopefully you can compare those well to some of the ones that you put down. Lastly, why is Gerald important in the play? He's a little bit different from the Birling family, who are clearly from two generations. And before this was an exam text, it used to be a coursework text. And I'd often, when I was teaching it for coursework, kind of avoid Gerald because I'd be like, what is the point in Gerald? But obviously, since it's been an exam text, I've had to think a lot more closely about Gerald because there's always a possibility you might get a Gerald question. Having thought more closely about Gerald, actually, he's serving lots of really, really good purposes in the play. So firstly, I'd say his most important purpose is he helps to reveal the hypocrisy of Edwardian times, especially the hypocrisy of class differences and gender differences. The other thing that he represents are the upper classes. So Mr. Birling desperately wants to be a member of the upper classes, but remember, Mr. Birling isn't upper class. Currently, he's middle class, Mr. Birling. He started life as a working class lad, and he's worked his way up through determination. Remember, in the stage directions, he's rather provincial in his speech. So he's got an accent, not received pronunciation. These all give away his working class roots. Mrs. Birling is social superior, and she always seems to be coaching him in manners, like don't thank the cook for cooking a nice meal. Some really horrible upper class manners, actually, she teaches him. Rather snobbishly, people would describe Birling as new money. So he wasn't born into a life of luxury and wealth. He has had to work for it. And the upper classes in Edwardian times thought that was rather louche, and that people who were new money would be rather vulgar with it. And Mr. Birling waving his cigar around and trying to get his knighthood and speaking with his provincial accent would definitely be seen as quite a vulgar character by someone like Lady Croft. Okay, so yeah, Birling's new money. Gerald, on the other hand, is old money. Lady Croft comes from landed people. That was a quote from earlier that Mr. Birling said, landed people and so on. Gerald also acts as a foil for Sheila, a dramatic foil for Sheila. So actually, Gerald helps us to learn more about Sheila, who arguably is a much more important character. And he serves to show how much she's changed. So even in that little bit that we've just been looking at in this particular lesson, we can see how she's gone from being very bitter and sarcastic to actually helping Gerald get all this out and to get it all off his chest, to actually feeling more respect for Gerald and speaking in a really adult way, and speaking as a woman who is in control of her life and her relationships and her emotions, and as a woman who's willing to start again and work on what she wants, not a silly little girl. Okay, so we learn more about Sheila because Gerald is a foil. Gerald also is useful in the text because he fills in the gap between the older and the younger generations. Remember that Sheila and Eric are in their early 20s, whereas the Birlings are in their 50s. So we've got the younger generation, the older generation, and Gerald kind of sits in the middle there. And you can also see that he doesn't really want to change fully, but he wants to, you can tell that he wants to make little changes to his life. I mean, arguably what Gerald did would probably be acceptable to his friendship group. So if that did come out about him keeping a mistress, no one would really judge him too much. He already had a reputation as a man about the town, and that kind of behaviour is just what's expected. So it's not like he's going to damage his reputation at all if it did come out. And then finally, J.B. Priestley uses Gerald as a dramatic device because Gerald is the only character who J.B. Priestley allows to leave the house. He's the one who leaves the Birling house. And that means that when he's out of that situation, out of the dining room, out of the house, he can learn and find things out. And we will discover what he finds out in Act 3. And we'll see him acting as more of a dramatic device. Okay, so lots and lots of learning today, probably a lot more context. But also thinking about this character of Gerald as well. So next time we're going to be picking up again on this theme of hypocrisy, the hypocrisy of people in positions of power. And we're going to be thinking about Mrs. Birling, and it's quite a dramatic end to Act 2 as well. So I will see you next week for our next lesson. Bye bye.